Thank you very much, and good morning. Good morning, and thanks for being here. I especially want to thank President Bresciani and the dear colleagues of NDSU, one of the top land-grant universities in the region, for the invitation to join you as we celebrate 150 years of proud land-grant legacy in the Great Plains. In case you detect an accent, I must clarify that it must be because of a defective mic. The accent comes from Puerto Rico, where I was born and raised, in the city that it's the home to the only land grant in the Caribbean and in a Spanish-speaking world, the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagüez. This institution is a source of profound sense of pride. Since the turn of the 20th century, it has prepared the scientists, the engineers, and the professionals that have transformed the economic landscape of the Caribbean basin. Therefore, as a child, I always aspired to attend this land-grant university. Like many of you, I was the first person in my family to attend college. Like in your case, if you were to meet my parents, you would find them to be fairly intelligent and talented. I surmise Puerto Ricans' remote ancestors must come from Minnesota, since there are frequent expressions of children being above average. So what is it that enabled me to explore a career path that was totally different from that of my merchant father and my homemaker mother? The answer is simple. Someone gave me an opportunity to go to college. Therefore, like all of you, I'm determined to make sure that no other young man or talented woman is ever deprived of the wonders of college education, because it truly changes lives. The education that I received in a land-grant university has provided me with opportunities that I could have never envisioned. It enabled me to start my career as a faculty member and as an administrator in the same university I completed my undergraduate degree, therefore giving me an opportunity also to give back and pay it forward. It made it possible for me to move to New Mexico, the land of enchantment, which, coming from the island of enchantment, I was convinced I was crossing the twilight zone, to work in another superb land-grant university. And recently, it has allowed me to live and work in the majestic state of Montana, serving its first established land-grant university. Upon learning of my appointment, a good friend texted me, "Why is it that you only get to work in the most spectacular places on the face of the earth?" To give you a sense of perspective, I should add that my native Puerto Rico has a total area of 3,500 miles. By my Harriet calculations, it would fit around 42 times in the state of Montana. However, there are 4 million people living in the island, and less than 1 million in the fourth largest state of the Union. When I was first approached to participate in the MSU presidential search, I quickly warned, and you will understand, I have never been to Montana. I don't look like, I don't sound like anybody in Montana. And yet, to a large degree, the lessons of the land-grant spirit have helped me in bridging perceived but unreal differences, enriching my life in so many ways. Last week, I was invited to serve as the keynote speaker at an 8th grade graduation ceremony. 2 years ago, in a different Montana school, I had a similar opportunity to address the graduating class, all 24 of them. In this case, the occasion required a combination of 3 rural schools to reach the celebratory quorum for the happy graduates, all 11 of them. At the end of the ceremony, while enjoying cake and ice cream with members of the graduating class and their families, a boy from second grade approached me. There he was, with his wild blonde hair, wearing long pants that were already too short for him. When the time came for me to say, well, I think I should go home, still enjoying his cup of ice cream, this farm boy looked at me with his bright blue eyes and said, I hope you have a wonderful life. And I have had a wonderful life. And I share these anecdotes with you because I owe a great deal to the land-grant university that has given me this wonderful life. What I did not know growing up in Puerto Rico, of course, was that the person who made it possible for me to transform my life and that of my family was a gentleman from Vermont. Perhaps one of the last things in President Lincoln's mind when signing the MORRILL Act was that with that signature, he would get to touch the lives of thousands of individuals, not only in the American continent, but well beyond our shores. As a proud alumna and servant of the land-grant university, I remind myself that our citizens hold high expectations about what our particular brand of universities can, should, and must bring to their lives today and to the generations that will inherit the land. We know the historical facts that speak of deep convictions, perseverance, and deft political negotiations in the passage of the Land Grant Act. Please allow me, and with particular apologies to Dr. Eisern, please allow me to indulge again in some history. In 1857, a U.S. congressman from Vermont by the name of Justin Smith Morrill proposed legislation that called for the government to grant tracts of land, the sale of which would generate an endowment to be used in building at least one college in each state and territory of the Union for the purpose of educating the sons and daughters of the industrial or working classes of America. As President Briciani noted, a line needs to be drawn under this passage of the bill. The leading object of these colleges would be, quote, to teach such branches of learning as are related to agriculture and the mechanic arts. The bill also stated that we were not going to exclude other scientific and classical studies, and that we would include military tactics. And ultimately, all of this would be to promote the liberal and practical education of our students in the several pursuits and professions of life. I think that there are few congressional bills that capture such poetic terms as this one. As some have already noticed, the irony is that Morrill, born in 1810 to a blacksmith, while being bright, brilliant, determined, intelligent, talented, never finished secondary school. In a recent article in the BurlingtonFreePress.com, Tim Johnson narrates, quote, Morrill wanted to go to college, but his father told him that the family could not afford to send them all, with the result that none of them went. Sounds familiar. Yet, with no formal education, after the age of 15, Morrill managed to amass a large enough fortune as a businessman that he retired at age 38 and went into public life. Before someone, perhaps from the media, concludes that this is another example of the futility of a college education, it is important to note that Morrill always deplored not having a college degree. At age 80, he wrote, quote, "To obtain the little education I have had cost me many evenings, Sundays after church, and scraps of time that could be devoted to it, involving far more labor than it would have necessitated if I could have been sent to proper institutions of learning." Morrill would go on to be the longest-serving congressman in the nation's history, serving in Congress for 44 years, 12 in the House and 31 in the Senate, up to the point of his death when he was 88. So in mid-18th century, higher education in America had more in common with medieval Europe than with the rapidly industrializing and expanding bustle that was our country. The ivory towers, the few ivory towers that we had in the East Coast and some in the West Coast, welcomed primarily gentlemen of means, the clergy, and wealthy men of leisure. No women. Much of higher education was expensive, private, and focused on the classics, law, medicine, and theology. At the same time, there was a crisis looming for the young nation because of the lack of readily available education for the people. And in a way, we could say that the impetus for higher education and the land grant reality came actually from famine. We were a very hungry nation, literally. In his 1858 appeal to Congress, Morrill noted that despite the nation's great wealth of land, it had imported $100 million of agricultural goods the previous year. That New England wheat and potato production had each dropped by 50% or more from 1840 to 1850. The cause? American farmers did not know how to farm. The land was being exhausted. Soil was eroding, and crop yields were plummeting. To compound this situation even further, in industry and technology, it was common for American companies and the government to import engineers and technicians from Europe to build bridges, factories, railroads, and any number of complicated public works. There was little to no place in America to train our own engineers or scientists. Therefore, it should not come as a surprise that ignorance on the part of many Americans stood as an obstacle to the benefits of science, technology, and engineering. There are a number of often quoted passages about opposition to a new technology in the early 1800s. The gas lamp. Let me read you a few. This is what people thought of this technology entering their lives. Quote, "Artificial lighting is an attempt to interfere with the divine plan of the world, which called for dark during the nighttime." Another one. "Lighted streets will incline people to remain outdoors, thus leading to increase of ailments by colds." And the last one, perhaps my favorite. "The fear of darkness will vanish, and drunkenness and depravity increase." Americans needed education. We needed education to feed ourselves, to build ourselves, to steer away from superstition, and through it, to empower the people. Thomas Jefferson had already expressed his conviction about the need of publicly funded education to protect the democratic future of America when he wrote in a letter, "Let us in education dream of an aristocracy of achievement rising out of a democracy of opportunity. Preach, my dear sir, a crusade against ignorance. Establish and improve the law for educating the common people. Let our countrymen know that the people alone can protect us against these evils, and that the tax which will be paid for the purpose is not more than the thousandth of what will be paid if we leave people in ignorance. So, in 1857, Morrill made his first proposal to Congress for land-grant colleges and universities. In it, he placed such a high value on an educated citizenry, I don't know if you know this, that tuition was going to be free. Morrill's proposal, of course, was a controversial one. As former APLU President Peter McGraw has asserted, we should make no mistake, this was a radical, populist concept. Providing higher education for the working classes was not universally accepted. 5 years would go by before the bill was signed into law. The first time, the House defeated it. The year after, the bill passed the House 105 votes to 100, only to be defeated by the Senate. Another session brought with it renewed animosity, and members of the Senate viciously attacked the Morrill bill along the way. It was called, and this deserves to be quoted too, quote, one of the most monstrous, iniquitous, and dangerous measures which have ever been submitted to Congress. Another quote, it is one of the most extraordinary engines of mischief. And still more, it was called an unconstitutional robbing of the treasury for the purpose of bribing the states. Sounds awfully familiar. The Morrill bill passed the Senate by just 3 votes. That's how we're here. But about a week later, President James Buchanan vetoed it, arguing it was unconstitutional. Nothing new under the sun. Morrill used this crisis to his advantage, pushing forward his bill. He made it more appealing by including military instruction as part of the land-grant mission. The Union needed officers, after all, and thanks to the secession of the southern states from the Union, the congressmen who had formed the backbone resistance to his bill were no longer there to oppose it. Thus, the phrase specifying and including military tactics. That's how it was included in our foundational document. As we know, the bill was finally approved July the 2nd, 1862, when President Abraham Lincoln signed it into law. The Morrill land grant saw the light of day in America's darkest hour. In the midst of our Civil War, when brother fought against brother and the nation's very fabric threatened to unravel. It was a powerful lesson for our deeply polarized and paralyzing ways today. Rather than being constrained by the immediate circumstances of their time, eventually those elected officials chose to envision a better and brighter future by educating the sons and daughters of the working families of America. The year of 1862, as was pointed out recently, gave us some pieces of congressional legislation that were of paramount impact and not totally devoid of controversy, particularly for the American West. It was the year that saw the Homestead Act, approved in the month of May, and the Pacific Railroad Act, which was signed on July the 1st, the day before the Morrill Act. Certainly, the Homestead Act and the Railroad Act provided us with horizontal and geographical mobility. But it was the Morrill Act that gave us the vertical and social mobility that would strengthen and characterize American democracy. That is why we are known as the People's University. The concept of a system of colleges and universities built in the people's interest was actually a project that has been noted today, was initially promulgated by Jonathan Baldwin Turner, an educator from Illinois. A graduate of the New Haven institution, then known as Yale College, Turner devoted his entire life to advocate for a reality different from the one he witnessed, in which only 2% of the American population had access to a college education. 2%. He stated, quote, "Colleges of this day provide a good liberal education for the professional class, which constitutes only a small fraction of the population. Nowhere are there colleges for the great mass of people. We need a system of education adapted to the needs of the common man, which would elevate him to his right place in society. Education should be practical as well as academic, and it should not be the monopoly of the privileged few, but rather the right of everyone who has the desire and the ability to learn." It was Jonathan Baldwin Turner who came up with the basic concepts of the Land-Grant Act, that of universal access to higher education, of a curriculum based on practical instruction without exclusion of the classical education, and of the funding mechanism of an endowment generated by the sale of federal land. At a time when Congress explored the idea of establishing a National College of Agriculture, following the model of the naval and military ones built in Annapolis and West Point, respectively, it was Turner who advocated instead for the establishment of such a college, but not only in his native state, but in building a system of colleges that would encompass the entire nation. Talk about thinking outside the box. It was Turner who, on the advice of his elected officials, sent his concept papers and documents to Congressman Morrill, seeking his support as a representative of one of the oldest states of the Union. And more interestingly, according to John Campbell, it was Turner who had approached his anti-slavery friend in Illinois, Abraham Lincoln, when President Buchanan vetoed the bill. It has been researched that Turner had indirectly helped the future president learn grammar when he was but a harvestman. So, we have a debt of gratitude with Jonathan Baldwin Turner, whom, thanks to his fervent advocacy, later in life received the name of John the Baptist. The passage of the Morrill Act in 1862 did not end just in Morrill's work. When he saw the initial funding was not enough to ensure the survival of land grants, he presented 7 more bills to help aid colleges and universities. 7. His bills were killed 12 times until 1890, when the second Morrill Act was passed, which gave a boost of funding to states with land-grant universities and established, as we have mentioned this morning, institutions which gave unprecedented access to higher education to African American students. The Morrill Act, as we have also said, even received new life over 100 years later with the passage of the Land-Grant Act of 1994, which has given exclusion, as President Gibb just noted, to a group of 34 Native American tribal colleges and universities in 12 states. Incidentally, it is interesting to note that when APLU formed a task force to approach Congress back for what would be the 1994 bill, that task force was chaired by then former president of Montana State University, Michael Malone. So the Morrill Act has come to be viewed as one of the 100 milestone documents by the National Archives. In this exalted company are the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, and the Civil Rights Acts. To me, when I read the MORRILL Act, I hear echoes of our Declaration of Independence. As a nation, first, we wanted freedom. As a young country, we needed to secure education. And together, these two pillars would protect each other. We would be free to educate and be educated, and education in turn would make us free. That's why this is so important. More than 20 million Americans have received degrees from land-grant colleges and universities in fields as diverse as animal and range science to astronomy, business, film, nursing, and zoology. The land-grant system is a unique model of higher education in the world. It helped inspire 150 years of global leadership by the United States. Thanks to the promotion of access and affordability, its focus on both a practical and liberal education, and its tripartite mission of teaching, research, and outreach, which would be galvanized by the Hatch Act of 1887 and the Smith-Lever Act of 1914. Today, as we celebrate this remarkable achievement known as the land-grant university, let's ask ourselves some inconvenient questions as we look to the century ahead of us. Actually, let me ask them first so that you don't ask me. First question, are we still responsive to an open university model? In our quest for excellence, and for national rankings prepared by the same media that derides a college education, we should not forget our commitment to inclusiveness. The founding of land-grant universities was not limited to regions where the educational system was established and mature, or where students would be better prepared for college education. If so, we would not have one here or in Montana. Let me ask, how many of our original homesteaders do you think were college ready? The fundamental principle of the MORRILL Act was not to exclude the ones who perhaps would fail, but rather to invite everyone to succeed. But I still hear it all the time. College is not for everyone. And many of you and I still remember the way and manner in which, as timid freshmen, we were cordially welcomed by a presidential address opening with, "Look to your left, look to your right. Those individuals will never graduate." And by the way, did you notice that it was always the poor souls who were sitting to your left and to your right, the ones that were going to fail? Please do not misunderstand me. It is important to recruit great students that graduate at the top of their class. They enrich our universities in more ways than just intellectually. It's great to have them in the classroom. But if we subscribe to an exclusive model in which we only recruit the best and the brightest, a conveyor belt model in which the outcomes are in direct proportion to the inputs, where did we leave the transformational proposition of our universities? Paraphrasing Mike Martin, we need to ask, are we building walls or are we building ladders for those students? Every day, in everything we do in a land-grant university, we challenge the odds and we confirm the equation that access and excellence are not two mutually exclusive terms. Our mission is to provide access, not to restrict entry, in the words of Robert Sternberg, who also said, land-grant institutions are particularly focused on value added, producing the future leaders who make the world a better place. Which brings us to another inconvenient question, that of retention and graduation, core elements of our performance as institutions of higher education. Let's face it, the fact that we lose almost a third of our students in their first year and that slightly less than half graduate after 6 years is simply unacceptable. We can and we must improve educational attainment without sacrificing quality or compromising standards. The emperor has no clothes. We can give our students the tools to be successful by rethinking course content and pedagogy in terms of how they learn, which, by the way, is different from the structures and strictures of when we learn, and by being of a single mind and heart in our goals to advancing their progress towards degree completion. The corollary question is, of course, about the future of our publicly funded status. As state legislatures continue to walk away, sometimes running away, from the pact that made us a great nation. As this happens, student loan debts and resulting loan default rates get out of control. What are we doing to avoid disaster in this furious race on a road to nowhere? And what is our sustainable growth model for research? In particular, I need to ask, what are we doing with the agricultural research that literally fed this nation and the world? What is our plan as federal resources for competitive funding for research continue to dwindle? As land-grant universities, have we developed tactics and strategies, partnerships, and alliances to open the future to the new frontiers in food and energy production, medicine and healthcare, information technology and genetic engineering, and their impacts in our social, economic, and personal dimensions? And what about extension? That part of our mission that allows us to claim that the entire state is our campus. By the way, Mr. Provost, that Cruzado Extension Center sounds interesting. We are proud of Extension's response to today's needs, providing support to grandparents raising grandchildren, educational opportunities for homemakers and inmates alike, hands-on science and math projects for school children, financial literacy for families, bringing tangible benefits to the citizens of our respective states. Then the question is, if our extension programs are partnering with us in our scholarly endeavors and pursuits, do we hold those in the same esteem as our academic and research endeavors? Do we value them and reward them in a manner that is consistent with our aspirations as engaged land-grant universities? As you can tell, there are many questions in my heart this morning, which brings me back to the story of the 8th grade graduation ceremony and my little rural boy. Would you believe that I was kindly advised not to talk about the prospect of college to these kids for fear that they might not be admitted? Or concerned that their parents would not be made too self-conscious about their inability to pay for college education? Since you kind of know me by now, you know what I did in my remarks, right? So my last question to you is, do you think that boy and others should have the same right that you and I enjoyed? And will there be a place for him in the land-grant university of tomorrow? This morning, let me close by looking to the past for inspiration for the future, by telling you the story of another remarkable man. Maurice Rolfe Hilleman was an American microbiologist who specialized in vaccinology and developed over 3 dozen vaccines more than any other scientist. Of the 14 vaccines routinely recommended, Hilleman developed 8. Those for measles, mumps, hepatitis A, hepatitis B, chickenpox, meningitis, pneumonia, and Haemophilus influenzae bacteria. Hilleman is credited with saving more lives than any other scientist of the 20th century. He was born in 1919 on a farm near the High Plains town of Miles City, Montana. His parents were Anna and Gustav Hilleman, and he was their 8th child. His twin sister died when he was born, and his mother died 2 days later. Little Maurice was raised in the nearby household of his uncle and worked in his youth on the family farm. He credited much of his success to his work with chickens as a boy. As you know, chicken eggs are used to develop vaccines based on weakened viruses. Due to lack of money, Maurice almost failed to attend college. His eldest brother interceded, and Hilleman graduated in 1941 as first in his class from Montana State University on a scholarship. He won a fellowship to the University of Chicago and received his doctoral degree in microbiology. After a life of rigorous work in the pharmaceutical industry, this Montana country boy was elected as a member of the U.S. National Academy of Science, the Institute of Medicine, the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and the American Philosophical Society. In 1988, President Ronald Reagan presented him with the National Medal of Science, the nation's highest honor for scientific enterprise. Hilleman received the Prince Mahidol Award from the King of Thailand for the advancement of public health, as well as a special Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Health Organization, the Mary Woodard Lasker Award for Public Service, and the Savin Gold Medal and Lifetime Achievement Awards. He died in 2005. Robert Gallo, co-discoverer of the AIDS virus, has said, "If I had to name a person who has done more for the benefit of human health with less recognition than anybody else, it would be Maurice Hilleman. Maurice should be recognized as the most successful vaccinologist in history." Today, let's just say it again. The land-grant university holds the promise of a better and brighter future by educating the sons and daughters of the working families of America. If we can prepare in our classrooms and in our labs the next Maurice Hilleman, the next Norman Borlaug, the descendants of promise of Mr. Chisholm, our existence will be validated again. Of course, we will continue to face challenges as we are no strangers to adversity. One of MSU's first students, Thomas McKee, described the financial dilemmas that have been part and parcel of our history. He said, "The college came to Bozeman in that springtime of 1893 in true biblical fashion, carrying neither purse nor script nor shoes. It needed money to get started and couldn't get money until it did start." This has been the story of our day, particularly in a state like ours, where we staunchly adhere to a mentality of deprivation rather than to a framework of abundance. But this has not deterred us from registering great accomplishments. Today, let's stand firm in our commitment to celebrating the legacy we have inherited, the MORRILL Land Grant Act, and the visionary system it established. As we go back to our respective engines of mischief, let's assert our unequivocally and renewed efforts to the preservation and expansion of this extraordinary feat in American history that illuminates our past and our future like 1 million lamps of shale gas. Happy 150th anniversary, dear colleagues. I salute all of you for your dedication, and I wish you success as you continue to advance the distinctive teaching, research, and service of the land-grant university. Actually, what I'm saying is, I hope you have a wonderful life. Thank you.